Take a drink before I do this. I need some water. Welcome back to my channel, and thanks for following along with my gastric bypass journey. Today's video is going to be about my entire experience at Mexico Bariatric Center, from flying in to flying out. I wanted to sit down and just explain my entire experience, in addition to my previous video that has all of my clips of, right after surgery and kind of what I was experiencing. Just an overall video on my experience on how everything went, because it was an entirely new experience for me. I have never gone out of country for surgery. In fact, prior to researching for this surgery, I probably wouldn't have ever thought of it. We get this idea in our head that going to another country for surgery is absolutely ridiculous. Why would we go to another country when there's great healthcare here and great doctors here? And what was I thinking? But when it really came down to it, ultimately, I chose Mexico Bariatric Center because this is what they do. Weight loss surgery is what they do every day, several times a day. They are experts at it. They've done thousands of surgeries. They know what they're doing. And when I take a step back and I was looking at going to Virginia Mason in Seattle. And although they are known to be a great provider, when I sit down and think about it, I would have had a doctor that just specialized in laparoscopic surgery, but not necessarily bariatric surgery. I probably would have gotten amazing care. I probably would have had a perfectly fine surgery and everything probably would have gone fine. This is a surgery that's done regularly now. It is not abnormal for this surgery to occur. However, the surgeon that ended up doing my surgery does sleeves and bypasses every day. And he was also known for working on people with really high BMIs and, what would be considered a little trickier of a situation in a more complicated surgery. I felt good about that decision. So that's just a little background as to why I chose to go to Mexico for my surgery. But let's talk about how it went and what everything was all about. So the day before my flight, my driver actually texted me and got a hold of me, let me know where exactly to expect meeting him, what time. He confirmed my flight number, confirmed all the details, and gave me a picture of him and the van, and just really set me up to know exactly what I was going to expect when we got to San Diego. Flying was flying. I mean, the only difference here was that it was during COVID, and so, we were as careful as we could be, and that was nerve-wracking as it is, but we got through that. I've never been to San Diego before, but it was really, really easy. The airport was super easy to navigate, and because we just had carry-ons, we just walked right on out of the airport, and the pickup location was just right there, right on the curbside. The only real hiccup here was that I did get a text in the morning from my driver saying that there was going to be a switch. He was telling me that there was a new driver that was going to be picking me up, but he gave me his number. He told me to text him as soon as we landed and everything would be fine. So I did that, and this driver came and picked us up right away. We were the only ones in the car. He did pick us up in a normal car. It wasn't a van. I don't know if the timing were different, if maybe they would have multiple people, because I have heard that they would pick up more than one person at the airport. That's always a possibility, but it was just me and my mom who came as my companion, and we immediately headed towards the border. I could probably get into a whole bunch of different stuff about the border and the way people make it seem. Ultimately, getting across the border was the absolute easiest part of this trip. We literally just drove across the border. We didn't have to show our passports. We didn't have to get out of the car. We didn't have to do anything. Getting across the border is a lot easier than people like to make it seem. Getting into Mexico isn't the problem. Getting back from Mexico, of course, there's a lot of checkpoints. There's a lot of things that you have to do and follow and show. But getting into Mexico, Easy peasy. From getting off of the flight at the San Diego airport to getting across the border and at our destination, it was probably 30 minutes tops. It was just zoom and we're there. He told us when we were on our way that we were actually going to the hospital first instead of the hotel. We found out later that our particular driver, this was his first day, and someone had told him to go to the hospital first, and that really probably wasn't the procedure that he needed to do, especially because things were a little confusing when we got to the hospital, but everything was fine. So one of the things that was a little unfortunate with this whole situation because of the mix-up was that my mom, who isn't allowed in the hospital because she's a companion, had to stay downstairs in the waiting room with all of the bags. I think if it had gone down the normal way, we would have been dropped off at the hotel first, and then she could have stayed there, and then I could have gone to the hospital. So I just feel bad for her because she was kind of bored, and it sounded like they didn't hook her up with the Wi-Fi, so she was really bored. So shout out, Mom. Thanks so much for watching all of our bags and just probably people watching the whole time. So once that was sorted out and figured out, she stayed in the lobby. I signed in at the desk area that they have before you go upstairs in the hospital, which is where everything takes place. I had to take my temperature. I had to fill out, my name and some information. And then they sprayed me down with, I'm assuming a disinfectant spray of some sort. I had to spin around and dance around in circles while Carla, who everyone knows Carla runs the place. Carla keeps everybody going. But Carla sprayed me down before I headed upstairs to get everything done. I think because of the timing, it sounded like I started before everyone else did. So I was just by myself for this point, and I did my blood work first, which is super easy, just taking blood and then walking to the other room. And then I filled out some typical paperwork that you would fill out in a doctor's office, just some information about prior surgeries and health concerns and things like that. They go over some paperwork and you sign some things, some releases, some normal stuff. And then at that point, the rest of the people started flooding in. So there were a handful of people now who were all doing the same things and kind of going through everything as a group. Next, I was taken into a private room, and the woman there took my height and weight and calculated my BMI, and that's where I got my starting weight for surgery. So at that point, that's when I was told that my BMI was 59 and that my starting weight was 344 pounds. Which again, I was so ecstatic for because that meant 30 pounds exactly that I lost on pre-op. So I was just in a great mood from that point on. She had me take my shirt and my bra off because of the EKG, and I lay down on the hospital bed where she put all the little sticky things all over my chest and was running the EKG. The whole time she was talking to me and she was so friendly. And she ended up telling me that she got the surgery several years prior, and she was just sort of walking me through her experience and kind of reassuring me. And she told me, it may be really uncomfortable for the first few days, but it's just a few days of discomfort. And then, the rest of your life ahead of you. And I mean, by the way, she looked great. She did show me a before picture before I left that she pulled up on her phone. And she made everything just really like casual and really nice. When I was done with that, I went back to the waiting room with everyone else as they sort of cycled through and did the same things, because at that point we needed to go to other locations, and so we all needed to be done with our stuff. I did a lot of waiting. They gave us an electrolyte drink, which was really nice, so I drank that and I just kind of sat in the lobby talking to people and eavesdropping. So at the end, we found out that there were several of us who hadn't done the first step, which it sounded like we were supposed to go do our COVID test at a different location first and then come to the hospital. But for whatever reason, there were a handful of us who did it backwards. So they had two separate vans take us to our two separate locations. A handful of us were then taken over to another location, and that's where they did the CT scan. That again was also a lot of waiting. It was a very small little clinic, and there were other people there other than just us as well. So we had to wait a little while before it was available. And the CT scan was pretty easy, and not a whole lot was going on there, except that it might be a little bit uncomfortable to hold your breath that long. Ultimately, what they're doing is they are taking the CT scan so that they can look at your lungs and really determine if your lungs are healthy enough for surgery and if there's any sign of COVID at all. From my understanding, it's a pretty reliable way without actually having to take a COVID test and wait a couple days. And so that's what we did. And when we were finished with that, then they finally took us back to the hotel. I also feel like I should add that every single time I was anywhere, people were constantly offering to take my bag. No one let us move our bags around on our own. All of the drivers, even Carla, everybody was just very kind and they were always offering assistance to us. We got to the hotel and again, they took the bags from us and they were like, no, we got it. Go ahead. Because again, I was doing this during COVID, the hotel was actually taking temperatures and recording them and making you hand sanitize before you came into the building. So they took our temperature, we sanitized, we go inside, and that's when we met Juan. Juan was kind of another coordinator and another face to this whole medical tourism thing that we were a part of. He had a desk kind of in the back corner of the lobby where he was during the day and could be reached for any questions or assistance or anything like that. And he was so much help for my mom, who was the companion, who was kind of on her own for most of this trip. He was fantastic. He walked us through everything. He verified that I was getting picked up at 6 a.m. the next day for my surgery, and he made sure everything was taken care of and helped us get checked in and all situated. At the hotel, they give you unlimited broth, popsicles, and Jell-O. When we first got there, because they knew we were coming, they had a broth, popsicle, and a Jell-O sitting out on the, I guess it was like the buffet table for me to walk by and grab on the way to the room. So it was already out and ready for me. And then they just let me know that you go over to the kitchen window and ring a little bell and just ask them at any point before 9 p.m. for any of those three things, and you can have as much of it as you want. I got my little snack. I went upstairs to the room, and the room was very nice and very comfortable. It was just a very, very nice hotel room, and it felt very clean and safe and great. So by that point, I was hungry. I was a little thirsty. I was tired. I had spent about 3 hours doing all of the pre-op stuff before they dropped me back off at the hotel. So I was ready to call it a night. I think I had 4 broths, 3 Jell-Os, and a couple popsicles. I just felt like I couldn't get enough. I was constantly drinking. And then I reached a point where I said, I don't want any more. I'm done. I've had as much as I possibly could. And that was probably 8 p.m. or so. Obviously, I had to stop drinking before midnight for my surgery. I ended up stopping much earlier than that. But the broth was pretty tasty. The Jell-O tasted a little different than it does in the States. I'm not entirely sure what the flavor difference was, but I could tell there was something different about it. And then the popsicles, I think, were like lemonade. I think they were definitely homemade, and I think that they were just like frozen lemonade. They were very good. Since I had to get up at about 4:30 in the morning to prepare for being completely ready to go and in the lobby by 6, I did go to bed a little bit early that night. And with the day of travel and everything, it was actually not that hard to get to sleep. I was so happy that I had a really good night's sleep that night. I brought some earplugs and just zonked out. And aside from the fact that I did wake up early, I think I was up and ready at 4 a.m. and couldn't go back to sleep. Aside from that, I mean, I feel like I slept really well. The bed was very comfortable, and I knew that a good night's sleep before all of this was probably going to be needed. So I got up that morning, and the instructions were to scrub yourself really well from head to toe and be as clean as possible before surgery. I took a nice long shower and I just scrubbed away, and I wanted to be as clean as I could. And I knew that this was going to be the last shower for a few days, so I just wanted to be as clean as possible. Of course, I was ready early. I wasn't really hungry. I was a little nervous, which is probably why I wasn't too hungry or thirsty in the morning. You know, I just kept telling myself over and over that it was going to be fine and there isn't anything to be nervous about. and I just wasted a little bit of time until going down into the lobby. I did go into the lobby about 15 minutes early and was sitting there. Unfortunately, the driver was a little bit late, so we ended up sitting in the lobby for quite a while. I did bring my bag with me, and I did show on my last video what I ended up packing and bringing with me to the hospital. So that came with me. I didn't want to leave it in the hotel because I wanted to make sure that I had access to my things. So the driver came. It's maybe a 10-minute drive over to the hospital. It's really not that far. It was really interesting because we drove by the traffic and the line to go across the border for, a day of work in the US. And so our driver was pointing out, what the line was, and that they usually start at about 3 a.m. I think he said it was like 3 a.m. to 9 a.m. is just packed, and it's just crazy the amount of traffic trying to go across the border because it's cheaper to live on the Tijuana side and travel into the US for work. So there's actually quite a bit of people who choose to do that. I wouldn't want to do that commute. No, thank you. When we got to the hospital, it was pretty quick at that point. So they took me into my room. I did have a private room, and it was a pretty good size one because it was a room that was set for 2 bed spaces, but I had it all to myself. So that was really nice. And immediately they told me to get naked and put on my gown. So I went ahead and I set all my things to the side and, nicely folded my clothes, put them off to the side, got into my gown and got all ready. They brought in compression stockings at that point and told me to put them on. I thought they were going to be a lot harder to get on my fat sausage legs, and they weren't that bad. So I pulled on those compression stockings, and then I was waiting. The nurse that I had in the morning, he struck me as maybe being someone who is a little new or maybe a little bit nervous. He wasn't super comfortable, I don't think, with putting in the IV. He ended up sort of hoping and then managed to get my blood vessel on the first time, but he was surprised. I have a problem with needles. It's a hit or miss with me. Usually I just look away while they take blood or anything. But this time I looked away, and then I think the problem was that I looked down at my hand after he had it in and it was all situated. Suddenly I felt awful. I felt super lightheaded, and I didn't even realize I passed out. Like I said in my last video, it was a very weird experience, and I ended up waking up from that thinking that I had gone through surgery already and super confused about what happened. And he was like, "Why didn't you tell me you have a problem with needles?" I said I didn't think it was going to be a problem. I was still feeling lightheaded, so I laid down. They were so nice to me. They took the blanket and the pillow that I had brought from home, and they kind of tucked me in and put that over me and just let me lay there and be comfortable while I continued to wait. And they hooked me up to the IV. And then at that point, I was just kind of laying in the bed with my fuzzy blanket, just waiting. A couple of people came in to check on me. They were kind of, laughing and trying to make light of the fact that I had passed out because they were trying to keep things light. And, I think they thought I passed out because I was nervous. One of the doctors came in to give me a spiel about everything and check with me on a bunch of stuff. He had made this comment not to worry about passing out. Don't be embarrassed about it. It's totally fine. It happens. I'm probably really nervous. I'm in another country and I probably don't trust these doctors, and the whole situation is crazy. And I said, "No, I trust you guys." And he said, "Well, thank you for that." He was very glad to hear that. I think they were all just trying to be extra nice to me because they thought I was super nervous about it. And although I was a little bit nervous, for the most part, it really was just this weird head thing I have with needles. I had several people from the surgery team who came in to check with me and talk with me before surgery, including my surgeon. I kind of wish that I had talked to him a little bit longer, but I didn't have any questions. I've been researching this for months. I feel like I know everything there is to know, at least about the surgery process. So I didn't really have a lot to talk to him about, but it was very nice to meet him. It just kind of put me at ease to know that my surgeon came in and said hello and gave me an opportunity to talk to him before surgery. The weirdest part about this experience, and the thing that I did read about, but they don't really say very much, so people don't seem to realize this occurs, is that you walk yourself to the OR. And that's a weird, weird experience. I haven't been put under a lot in the US, but I have had several occasions when I was younger. And my experience has always been that they kind of get you all hopped up on some loopy juice and you're kind of out before they even wheel you in there. But not in this case. So when it was time for surgery, they came over with a wheelchair. They took my IV off of the hook, put it in my lap, and I carried that with me while they wheeled me to the elevator and upstairs to the OR. That's when I started getting nervous because I didn't really have anything in my system that would have calmed me too much. At least I don't believe they gave me anything. And so once it became real, like I'm about to walk into that OR, my heart started going a little bit. So they wheeled me over to the OR. They got everything in a row. They made sure everything was good. And then they asked me to stand up and walk forward. So I walk into the room and there's like 5 people in there prepping and getting ready. And they asked me to get up on the OR table. So I do. So there I am on the OR table, laying back. They've got the arm pieces splayed out and they start hooking up the IV and putting stuff into it and just sort of talking to me. And this was all a blur. It happened so fast. I feel like there was only 2 or 3 minutes, in all honesty, before I don't remember anything. At that point, they put a mask on me. She told me to breathe, and I don't really remember anything else. It was so fast. The one experience I have from when I was a child, I was about 12 when I had to go under for knee surgery, and they put a mask on me, and it was a terrifying experience. I don't know why, but I distinctly remember when I lost feeling to my body, but my brain wasn't shut off yet. And it was just, as a 12-year-old, I was terrified for about 30 seconds before I blacked out. And this wasn't like that at all. I don't know what they use, but it was fast and I don't remember anything. I have the tiniest recollection of waking up in the recovery room, just enough to know that somebody said my name and they made a comment, about me waking up and that the surgery went well and there were no complications. And all I remember was going, yay. And then I was out again. The next time I woke up, I was inside my room from the beginning. They had already put my fuzzy blanket and my pillow under me. They had already kind of tucked me away. I was on oxygen and hooked up to all the BP monitors, and they were just monitoring everything after the surgery. I have a problem. I can say it's a problem now because when I had the surgery when I was 12, this was also an issue. I don't know if it's anesthesia related or if it's just what I do when I sleep, but as I'm sort of falling asleep, I breathe so shallow that my blood oxygen level monitor goes crazy. So it was almost like a nostalgic experience for me because it was so familiar to when I was a kid and this happened. But it's like every time I was about to fall asleep, the monitors would go beep, 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 beep because of my oxygen. So they kept having to come in and turn up the oxygen level and just monitor. And once they realized what was going on, they turned down that beeping and they just kind of let me do my thing because I was fine. I just breathed very, very shallow. Don't know what that's all about. So for hours, I just slept at that point. I would wake up very briefly as the nurses were coming in and checking on me and checking my IV and everything. But I spent a good portion of that day just sleeping after surgery. I don't remember exactly what time it was. I feel like it was early evening. I woke up and felt like I wanted to sit up. And I was seeing some people wandering the halls. I think my door was open because the nurses had been coming in and out. And I saw people walking by and it just felt like I wanted to sit up and be awake for a second. So I did. And I was looking at everybody in the hall and I said, do I just take all this stuff off? At what point can I go for a walk? Because everybody said, go walking as soon as you can after surgery. Walk, walk, walk. It makes you feel so much better. And so the nurses came in and And they were like, "Oh, are you feeling okay to move around?" And I was like, "Yeah. I mean, I'm a little groggy, but I felt, like I at least wanted to stand up." And so they helped me. I'm a little stubborn and I didn't want a lot of assistance with stuff. So I awkwardly put on my own pajama pants, which I couldn't at that point bend forward very much. So it was basically me holding on to one end and stepping through it awkwardly. But the nurse was kind of like a cheerleader. And when I did it, she was like, "Good job." Because I was like, no, I don't need any help. But yeah, then I just did a really quick walk around. And I mean, I was up and moving and feeling pretty good by that evening, the same day of surgery. That being said, I was very tired still and very groggy. So I did my quick little move around and then I really felt like I needed a nap again. So the majority of that first day was just on and off sleeping. I did wake myself up multiple times that night, so I didn't get a good sleep. And then, of course, it felt like anytime the nurses came in, I was just immediately awake and I couldn't sleep through anything. But I was able to get enough sleep and feel sort of rested. At that point, I had several nurses who had introduced themselves to me. Every time they had a shift change, they would come in and introduce me to the new nurse who was taking over. Everybody was so kind, and I only had a couple of times when they didn't really speak a lot of English, but they told me right away. They said, "Hey, this is my name," which I feel bad. I don't remember a lot of my nurses' names because I was so groggy. I feel so bad about that. But they would introduce themselves and they'd say, "I can't speak a lot of English." And I was like, "That's fine. I'm mostly sleeping." Anytime I needed help from them or anything, the most would be me trying to say it 2 different times and then they would understand what I was asking them. But I really didn't feel like I needed a lot, so it ended up being fine. And honestly, everyone was so nice and they took such good care of me. The language barrier really didn't matter at all. My leak test was the very next day. So they sit you in front of this x-ray and you can actually watch it too, which is pretty cool, where you drink this really gross liquid and they watch it go down into your new system, and they just make sure that your staple line is good, there's no obstructions, there's no leaking, and everything is a-okay from the surgery. And then they started me on liquids right away, and that's what I did. I practiced drinking, and it was really important to me because I knew how important it was to make sure that I was going to leave the hospital and not end up getting dehydrated later. So the drinking process was a little uncomfortable. My theory is that as soon as something went into my new stomach, it started churning and doing its stomach things, but it had also been like chopped in two. So as it was moving, I was feeling that pain on that staple line. And so I think that's why I would get these cramps and my stomach would feel really uncomfortable every time I took a sip. And I was taking the smallest sips. I was so cautious to introduce liquids. And I had heard and been told that you really want to take small sips because you don't want to take in too much at a time or it can be really painful and uncomfortable. So I was taking these tiny little sips every few minutes, just tiny little sips, because I was just so nervous to take on too much at once. But the nurses told me that I was doing really well with my liquids and I was holding things a little bit better than some of the other people on the floor, and it just made me feel really good about my process. You can watch the prior video that I posted if you want to see more about updates as I was in the hospital and how I was feeling. So I'm not really going to go into that in too much depth, but ultimately I was doing really well and I was feeling better and better every day. When it came to discharge day, they told me the day ahead of time that I would be discharged at 7 a.m. So I needed to be ready and packed and good to go by 7 the next morning so they could take me out of the hospital. I was a little worried that I wasn't going to get up in time or it was going to be difficult, but it ended up being just fine. I was so anxious and ready to leave that I was up in plenty of time. I slowly packed some of my stuff and got all ready. Carla came to help us leave. It was a little bit long of a process. We had to get all of us into the waiting room that were all being discharged the same day. And so when we all got together and the waiting room was full, that's when she walked us through all the things that we had to do. There was a lot to go over, so I'm sure that's why they had us all in one group. They were talking to us about our medication schedules, what we should be aware of, giving us our discharge paperwork, giving us some medical records to take back to our doctors. It was just a lot of information. I got a really handy reusable bag that says Mexico Bariatric Center on it. So I got to walk around the airport with that thing shining in front of everybody. It actually wasn't that bad, and my mom carried it for me, so it wasn't embarrassing. But inside the bag, they gave us, our discharge paperwork, some information, and then they gave us some drugs to take home. So I did want to share what they gave us. And some people got slightly different things depending on what their doctors recommended. And so it might be slightly different. But what I got was a box of antibiotics. And so this was about a 2-week supply. And then I had 2 boxes of pain medication. So this is a sublingual pain medication. It is an NSAID. It's a non-steroid anti-inflammatory drug, which ultimately we have to stay away from, especially post-surgery. But these, because they go under your tongue and they're sublingual, they are okay for us to take. So there were 2 boxes of this. One thing to be aware of, because I wasn't, it might be handy. There are only 4 tablets in this box. Now you take it every 8 hours, so I consider this basically a 2-day supply, but that's something to be aware of. And then there was a bottle of this plus gel. This is something that Carla explained to us is super, super helpful, and you can't really get a good equivalent of in the United States. She said that she has mailed this to people in the US who absolutely needed it, and so she recommended that we potentially get some more of it before we left the country. That being said, I will say I haven't touched this stuff. This is kind of like a heavy duty Pepto-Bismol, is from my understanding. If you are feeling nauseous or you have heartburn or a really uncomfortable full sensation, basically a lot of those tummy issues, you would take this. It sounded like you would take this in almost every situation that you would take Pepto-Bismol. Pepto, if you didn't know, does have aspirin in it, so it's something that we're not supposed to take. And it isn't as good as this stuff, is what I've been told. We were then told that we would go to the pharmacy so that we could fill the prescriptions for the drugs that were not given to us at the hospital, as well as get any extras that we might want before we go over the border. That was when I got to fill the prescription for omeprazole. This is a heartburn medication. It is something that you can get in the US. I just got it in Mexico because we were going to the pharmacy and I just had them give me one of everything that they prescribed me. The omeprazole, I'm pretty sure I have to take for a month, but it came in a 3-month supply and there's no reason to not take it, so I'm just gonna take the 3-month supply. I also got a box of blood thinners. This was written on my prescription as something that my doctor specifically wanted to keep me on for a bit. So I had the box of blood thinners. At that point, I did get myself 1 extra bottle of the plus gel and then 1 extra container of the pain medication. Again, this is only 4 tablets, and I didn't realize that when I only got 1 extra box. I'm very lucky. I have 3 tablets left. I stopped needing pain medication and I didn't run out. But I do recommend maybe getting 2 or even 3 extra boxes if you can, because it's not a big supply. And I just didn't look at it and realize that there were only 4 tablets. I paid about $138 US for everything that I got at the pharmacy. That included some medical tape because my nurse was super kind to me when I left the hospital, and because I told her that I was going to be taking a shower as soon as I got back to the hotel, she gave me a couple packages of gauze. So I didn't have to buy any gauze, but I definitely needed tape to redo my own bandages. So I bought some of that at the pharmacy as well. Once we were all done with the pharmacy and everyone got all their stuff, and it was a lot of people and it was a lot of time that we spent there. But once it was all done, they took us in 2 separate groups. Half of us were going to the airport right away and were flying home. And then the other half of us didn't have flights until later, so they were taking us back to the hotel. So at that point, I got to go back to the hotel and I got to shower. I took a long, happy shower and I washed my hair twice. The instructions were to once a day wash our wounds, wash our incisions with just soap and water very carefully, and then redo our bandages. And so, since they hadn't redone my bandages in the hospital because I was going to shower, I made sure to wash really well, felt really clean, and then I changed my own bandages and I just felt like a new person. That day in general, I felt so much better than I had every other day. It was like every day was just exponentially better. And so I was feeling really great. There wasn't a whole lot of time because they were taking us to the airport a little bit earlier than we needed to be there. Okay, like quite a bit earlier because our flight wasn't until 5:30. We had to make sure there was plenty of time to get across the border and just be at the airport in time to do everything. So after my shower, I really only had a little bit of time to get everything situated, and then we were back in the lobby, back in the van, and we were heading out to go across the border. So going back into the US was a little bit of a different experience. First of all, I am used to the Canadian border. I'm pretty close to it relatively, so I've been across it multiple times and I just know what to expect with that. The Mexican border is so different and it's so lively. There's so many people walking in and out between the cars, selling things, music, there's food, and there's just like a parking lot of cars going across the border. It is so busy. It's not what I'm used to. Even the busiest that I've been across the Canadian border was nothing on this. There was just so much happening. So we were in our van and we were in line. And what is nice is that there is a medical lane. So we were able to take the shortcut, so to speak, and bypass quite a bit because we were in the medical lane versus the normal traffic. There were working police dogs everywhere, smelling everything. They came around our van. They had us turn off the ignition and just smell everything. And the dog was, making sure everything was good. And then we pulled up to the border agent. And at that point, they checked all of our passports, asked us all the usual questions that they do going across the border. We did declare that we had medication. They didn't care about the medication. They really wanted to know if there's anything else we were bringing across, but all we had was medication in the van. But at that point, I don't know if it's something that was said or if it was just unfortunate randomness, but we did get chosen for a separate, more thorough search. So here's this van full of people who are so sore and so tired from their surgery. And we pull off into this other section at the border and they make us all get out of the car and file out and wait off to the side while they thoroughly search the van and take all of our bags out. I had a tough time that day because the number of times that I crawled in and out of that van, and I just really felt like it was a lot of movement. Nothing bad happened. It just felt like a lot. They didn't open or search our bags or anything. They just laid them out and had the dog go over it and smell everything. They checked some compartments and areas of the van just to make sure everything was good. It did take probably an extra 20 minutes. At that point, the only real inconvenience was the fact that I had to go to the bathroom really bad, but it was fine. They were just thorough and they were kind about it. And then when we were done, we all piled back in the van and headed across the border. The driver dropped us off at the airport and in front of each of our prospective airlines, so we didn't have to really walk all that far, which was very nice. I opted not to contact the airline and ask for wheelchair assistance. I felt not only like I was doing really well, but I wanted the excuse to walk. And I just didn't really want the wheeling around the airport. One thing of note that I think is important is about this Plus Gel again. So I got a second bottle of this, like I said, and I only took carry-ons for this trip. The TSA agent told me I'm allowed to have one of them, but I couldn't take two of them in my carry-on. The rationale I was given was that I'm allowed to have what might be needed for the flight, but not any more than that. So because there were two bottles, I could have one bottle available to me, but I could not have the second one. In addition to that, they do open it and test it So you have to be okay with the fact that they're going to open that medication and test the liquid and make sure that it's fine. So what we ended up doing is checking one of our bags. We had to go out of security and go check the bag, put that medication in the checked bag. And then when I came back through, they did allow me to keep my bottle of water and my little tiny bit of Gatorade, because A, I had just had surgery, but B, my medical documents did specify that I should be allowed to have those types of things going into TSA because it is so important to not be dehydrated. So aside from the fact that we were kind of jostling around in TSA, which, let's be honest, is to be expected at this point. Have you ever had just like an easy breezy time with TSA? It really wasn't a lot, and they were actually very kind. When we came back through the second time, they separated us out and checked us through an empty line so that we didn't have to wait or go through all this annoying stuff again. So that was nice. It also really wasn't that busy. I mean, COVID, right? I mean, at that point, we were good to go, and we just made our way to our gate, and we were there a little early. So I got some hot water at Starbucks and made a broth packet and tried to relax in the terminal before our flight. It was overall a really good experience. I felt very well taken care of. I never once felt like it was the wrong decision. I never once felt like people didn't have my best interests in heart. And I can't think of anything, honestly, that was a bad experience at all. They are a well-oiled machine over there. This is what they do every day. They know how to handle when things are going wrong. They know how to handle if there might be a hiccup here or there. They know how to take care of you, and they know how to make you feel comfortable, and they know how to do a damn good surgery. I have had no complications whatsoever. I've had no problems. I do understand that that's not always the norm, and that some people do have minor complications or nausea or issues that, might happen right after surgery, but I feel very grateful. I've had an extremely great experience. And based on that, if you're wondering if going to Mexico for bariatric surgery is a good idea, I would say based on my experience and everything that I went through over the last several months, including but not limited to the actual surgery experience, it was fantastic, and I don't regret it at all. And I highly recommend, if it's something that you're looking at versus paying $25,000 in the US out of pocket, it's definitely something to consider. Everyone has their own comfort level. Everybody has their own desires when it comes to post-op care and just all the little things. So, if you're not comfortable with that, that's fine. But if you're on the fence because it's Mexico, I would say don't worry about it at all. They know what they're doing. And honestly, I didn't even feel like I was in another country most of the time. It was just so comfortable and so easy. The whole thing was just a breeze, and they walked us through everything because this is what they do, and they are professionals. So I hope that was helpful. I know this is probably a long video, so if you managed to go through the whole thing, then you must be seriously wanting to know what this was like. But I just wanted to put out my entire experience from start to finish at what it was like, because there's, I think, a lot of us out there that had never seriously contemplated this medical tourism thing before, and it's really not as scary as you might think it is with initial thoughts. It was a very good experience. I felt really good the whole time. I felt like people really took care of me and helped me anytime I asked or anytime I needed something. There were moments that felt like it was kind of like a bariatric surgery factory, and people were just kind of being pumped in and out of the hospital. But that's because that's kind of what it's like. I mean, they do this every day. And so they have people coming and going and coming and going. And they're just, like I said, a well-oiled machine that just goes through the process. So A couple of times it kind of felt like, when you would watch the people cycle out and the new people come in, it almost felt like that, but never in a negative or awful way. If anything, it made me feel more secure in choosing this place that just knows how to do this surgery and do it well. So again, I hope this was helpful, and from this point on, now that I'm post-op, I'm going to keep updating on how things are going basically on a weekly basis, and just discussing how my life is changing and how I'm adjusting to this new way of eating, which is bizarre. I'll tell you right now, it's just mind-boggling when I sit down and think about it. So I hope everyone is having a really good time this holiday season, given the circumstances and everything going on. I hope that you're being jolly and having a good time, and I'll see you guys in the next one.